Hello, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for day two of the sixth annual Courier 12 Screenwriting Conference. I'm Scott Myers, an assistant professor in the film program at DePaul University, 30 film and TV projects at nearly every major Hollywood studio and broadcast network. And I also host gointothestory.com, the official screenwriting blog of the Blacklist. You're in for a day-long treat today. Our guests have been involved writing an amazing array of film and TV projects, including Guardians of the Galaxy, The Post, Long Shot, Halt and Catch Fire, Arrival, Captain Marvel, Haven, 13 Reasons Why, and more. This after last night's kickoff interview with Lena Waithe, who just was a fantastic way to start the Courier 12 event. We'd like to thank our guests, as well as students and faculty who work very hard to bring this to you for free. And that wouldn't be possible without the support of the director of the School of Cinematic Arts, Gary Novak, and our dean, David Miller. You can join Discord to network with other writers. The link was included in recent emails, but also pasted in chat and comment section, depending upon how you're watching. And if you hear something that inspires you, you want to share it on social media, use the hashtag DePaulC12 or hashtag screenwriting. So for today's first panel, focusing on a subject I'm sure many of you are interested in, breaking into business, I'd like to introduce my DePaul colleague, Matt Quinn.
Hey everybody, my name is Matt. I'm one of the screenwriting professors here at DePaul, and I'm going to be a moderator for the Breaking In panel. We've got three really great guests for you today, former actually DePaul alums. Sam Campos, who is currently a manager of drama development at ABC Network. Roberto Larios, who's an agent at Verve, and then JB Ballard, who's currently a writer's assistant working on the Starz series Gaslight. And so for this panel, it is about breaking in, and I'm assuming that's reference to breaking into the industry and not how to break into a car or bank or something like that. So we're going to focus on that. And to get started too, just because you all kind of represent different areas of the development and kind of writing world, that'd be great just to go around and kind of give some context to those titles about what your current position is and what are your current responsibilities. And then we'll kind of get into your individual stories in a little bit more depth after that. But if Roberto, if you could kick us off with just kind of talking about what you do for Verve.
Yes, so I'm a literary agent on the TV side at Verve. Basically what that encompasses is representing clients on the literary side and also on the directing talent side, and just being a representative for the voices that we represent.
Okay. Sam, you want to go next?
Yeah. Wow, how to explain. So basically, I shepherd, nurture, find any drama projects to air on ABC Network. That's probably the best short answer I could give.
All right, and JB.
Yeah, as a writer's assistant, I'm mostly taking notes, working on that 80 or 90 words per minute speed, and formatting files, sending off scripts, drafts to network, studio execs, the like. A lot of clerical duty as a writer's assistant.
And you're all, none of you are, you're all currently reside in Los Angeles, and thanks again for getting up early to meet with us on this. But you all sort of either from Chicago, JB, you're from Texas. So at some point you decided to make the move to LA, and was thought we could just kind of talk about what drove you, what was the deciding factor to go to Los Angeles and kind of pursue these various interests. Whoever wants to go. Roberto, you want to kick it off again?
Yes. Well, partially what motivated me to come to Los Angeles was the idea that, what we were taught in DePaul, which is if you want to make it in the industry, there's a good chance if you want to explore other avenues outside of being a writer, you go to LA and kind of do the agency route, go into working at a studio. And at the same time, though, the biggest benefit to it, or rather, the biggest motivating factor was how easy it was to come out here in a transition type period with the LA Quarter program. So going to the LA Quarter program, being here for a few months, interning at a few places, and getting a lay of the land allowed me to be out here and then kind of make it. Not necessarily, it's not always an easy move, but there was it was a soft cushion of sorts to definitely break in.
Yeah, and just really quickly to follow up on that, you were part of the MFA screenwriting program, definitely we're building a portfolio of work and stuff. What was the deciding factor to sort of move away from screenwriting a bit? I know you're still involved with it, being a talent agent, but actually then transitioning more into this role as an agent now.
I'll definitely give you credit, Matthew. Your course on screenwriting coverage on studio development really opened my eyes, especially when it came to the kind of the benefit, the craft of being able to break down a script, and at the same time to identify both the strengths of really good writing. And one thing that I noticed both within my cohort and also just in the industry as a whole is that there are very few Latino individuals on the other side of the fence. So being an ally, being a champion for those voices and to help push those stories forward is something that was ingrained in my mind. And being out here really gave me a crash course, and it really motivated me to pursue that side.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like you use your skill set as a writer, on a regular basis when you're, right before we hopped on, you were just talking about your weekend read and all the scripts that you had to go over. So I know you're at least reading scripts, but do you feel like that background in writing is something that you use on a daily basis?
Definitely. It teaches me to understand, at least to look at the potential, to look at the strengths of a story arc, to kind of look for those key moments, especially because, as I mentioned, I have quite a heavy load this weekend. And for me, if it comes in for representative purposes, if 15 pages in, the inciting incident is not quite there, it hasn't motivated me to keep reading past page 20, then I understand that, and it's because of having my MFA.
Yeah, great. How about you, Sam? I know you were a part of one of our first LA Quarter programs and stuff, but so what made you decide to go out to LA and also just kind of stay out there and pursue the path that you're on now?
Yeah, so I was on the pilot program of the LA Quarter, which this fall is coming up on 10 years. So I'm gonna cry after this panel. But anyway, I think it was just, again, to echo what Roberto said, there was never an idea that I wouldn't move to LA. And I think because of all of what, I was being told, through schooling, and just like, if I want a career in this, you need to be in LA. There's no other kind of option. And thank God the LA Quarter became a thing while I was at school, and was able to kind of test it out. I think at the time, had I not had the LA Quarter, I don't know what I would have done graduating and then trying to make that move myself and trying to get my own internships and not having the support of the LA Quarter, which I met, that's a whole other thing I could go on and how much the LA Quarter meant to me. But, when I was there and I did my internships, it was truly then that I was like, okay, I see myself in this industry in some capacity, and I can see myself living here. Like I enjoyed LA. Now that's different now, almost 10 years later. I would like to move back, but obviously I'm gonna stay in LA. But, I think it just was then that kind of made me realize I want to be in this for the long haul, and I want to pursue a career, that felt real, as opposed to when you're in school, you hope that this will be a thing. And then in my internships, then I realized that I can make this a thing.
Yeah. Just to kind of follow up really quick on something that both you and Roberto were saying, that, while you were in school, you were told, like, you have to go to LA, you have to go to LA. But when you both got out there, did you feel like, yes, that is correct? Or was like, I found myself here because they told me to go and now I'm stuck and I can't get out? Or was it like, did you feel like that was true? Yes, this is like where I really need to be.
I felt like it was true. I think we'll see what happens in COVID, like what the industry will look like after this. But up until, I guess, March, I guess I should say, I absolutely thought that was true. In terms of opportunity, the amount of jobs, I think unless you want to do physical production, there's kind of no real place to do something in the entertainment industry other than New York and LA, and LA just has more opportunities.
Roberto, anything else to add to that part of it? Like, did you feel like that was proven true once you got out there?
Yes, I would agree. And I guess to clarify, I wouldn't say you told us like, hey, you gotta, jump off the ship, but rather it was suggested.
More of a threat, like you're going, you don't have a choice. Yeah.
It was more of a suggestion, but more so it was a kind of, in a sense, especially hearing like your story and hearing other professor stories, like like Brad and Scott. Everyone at some point lived in LA. They did it, and at the same time, though, like Sam said, this is where the kind of hustle and bustle, where the opportunities are. And I think more so than anything, you get to meet and network, and it strengthens your your kind of profile and the connections. So that if you do decide to move away, to go back to Chicago, which I'm in Sam's boat, like I'd love to go back at some point, you know, you still have the kind of connections to keep doing the business that you're doing.
Just to make you feel a little bit better, when I woke up this morning, looked at my phone, it was one degree.
Ooh, don't miss that.
Yeah.
That's
So
definitely a perk.
a little bit better, a little bit. So JB purposely saved you for last because you're the one who's, you know, actually still writing here. And I think you have a job currently that a lot of students, you know, a lot of interest in television with the rise of the streaming services and things. A lot of people wanting to get into writers' rooms. And so can you sort of talk about, you know, your journey to LA, but then also how did you wind up in working? Because this is not the first writers' room you've worked in. So how did you even get into that opportunity?
Yeah, so I actually chose DePaul because of the LA Quarter program. I knew I wanted to go to LA when I was still in high school in Texas. So I went to DePaul knowing I would end up in Los Angeles, only place I felt like I could do what I wanted to do, which is write. And I got the internships that I needed to get, and then became a PA in scripted and non-scripted. So working in reality television, which was a grind, a lot of long 17-hour shoots for baby food commercials and things of that nature. But eventually I was networking with a lot of other DePaul alums, and one of my old roommates actually worked at Marvel, and he got my resume and he set me up with a writer's PA job on the show Moon Knight. So I worked on that show as support staff. I worked on Shameless in the writer's room as a PA, and then I got this job on Gaslit, the new Julia Roberts series for Starz. And the way that I switched from being a PA to a writer's assistant and writer's PA was just telling people what I wanted to do. I was really clear and upfront how I had studied screenwriting and how it was my passion. I've read every book that you recommended, Matt, front to cover or front to back. I have them all on my bookshelf. And I love the networking, and I love the camaraderie of the writer's room. So I was really passionate about getting in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's what you were just saying, like make your intentions known. And I think that is such a big part of finding success, is like making sure you're constantly putting yourself in that position to be successful and making your intentions very clear. Because, you know, they love to sort of pigeonhole you in a specific role, and they will let you stay there forever if you don't try to, you know, move forward. So definitely, you know, really good point there. The other thing I wanted to ask about is with all this stuff, because, you know, we were talking about DePaul and just school in general, and I think it's the same for no matter where you go to school and going out to LA. Is there anything that you wish you would have known, you know, before, now that you're out there, and is something that you wish you would have studied a bit more, just something that you feel like that if you could have told, you know, tell your younger self now this, that it would give you more of an advantage? Or, and anybody can chime in on that.
I could jump in. I think about this all the time. I wish I knew more about the job I have right now. So I guess it's good that we're doing this, but because I think had I known, I always assumed that like development executives were these suits that are the judge, jury, executioner of content, and that they just sit in these ivory towers and tell writers no. And so, I mean, it's sometimes true, but like so much of my job is so creative and collaborative and so fun. So I wish I kind of knew a little more of like what a development executive is. And I think I wish I just read, I mean, I read so much now, like I've read thousands and thousands of scripts, but like, I wish in school I kept myself to like reading a script a day. And I think, you know, because I think, I feel like, Matt, you had said it, somebody said it, like reading is the best way to kind of like learn the craft. And it's 1000% true. When you read and you read and you read and you read, you just start to, all those things that you're being told in school come into play, and everything's more clear, and you just learn so much quicker, whether you want to be a writer or not. Like it's just, you just need to read a ton.
Mm-hmm.
I agree wholeheartedly with that. I think that reading has been the best way of educating myself, especially when I'm trying to get more immersed with other genres that I'm not as familiar with. And I've worked on a range of shows, so I have to read every script and kind of recalibrate to a degree, because comedy is so different from drama, of course, in this industry. It's a whole process for sure.
I would say the one thing that I wish either I knew or we knew more was maybe the vernacular, just because I think that sometimes is what trips a few individuals up. I think we understand certain terms, but I think understanding the vernacular of what certain things are, especially when it comes to some of like the legal terms and some of the things that you may come across or learn at an agency. At times, it's probably easier if you're there to kind of understand and really kind of soak it all in. And in addition, I think more so for the writers to understand really the pitching process. I think pitching is one thing, but understanding that unless you have an overall deal, it's gonna not be as easy as like, hey, I'm gonna go in front of Sam Campos and pitch my idea, and she's gonna say yay or nay. There are terms like cook-offs. There are terms like it's a bake-off. It's not exclusive. It's something that what it means to pitch on an OWA, what it is to look at maybe pod deals, and understand the reality of what are the chances of you getting an idea or even going after certain IP. I think that's something that would be really beneficial for a lot of writers to know, and even on the management and agency side, because I think that if you decide to go this route, that's basically maybe 30% of the things we're dealing with on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I think we're touching on a lot of these areas, and I'd like to go into a little bit more detail on all of your areas of expertise, because we kind of have the writer, the agent, and then the exec. And so while we're talking about this, feel free to jump in on your perspectives on this, because I think it's all valid, because at one point it's all part of the process to get these projects made. And I want to go back to JB, and can you just talk a little bit more and sort of try to demystify here what the role of a writer's assistant is? Because we hear that phrase, and can you kind of give us some context and day to day, what is your responsibility?
Yeah, so it's honestly been different in COVID than it normally would be, but the primary thing is that the second the writer's room starts, you're the one who's taking notes, keeping track of like the boarding for episodes. So like if you have index cards that are for characters or for plot lines that you're trying to keep track of, you're kind of manipulating all of that while also keeping notes, keeping things on track. So a lot of it is coordinating with your showrunner and knowing what their vision for the show is. You can be doing the background work, so like writing up a pitch Bible or the story Bible for the series, which involves knowing every character inside and out and any potential arcs they may have or we might have scrapped but want to go back to. It's a lot of filing, storage, and figuring things out. One of the most important things is kind of keeping track of who's contributing and then going back to them for their episodes. A lot of writers have certain processes, so it's important to kind of tailor your assisting to their needs, as well as contributing when you can. As a writer's assistant, I like to pitch. I pitch often, but you have to know your time to pitch in a writer's room. That's important. Something that is, I would agree, was something that I didn't quite know when I came into the industry, but I'm starting to learn now, a few years in. But it's definitely multifaceted. I could go into great depth about scheduling and lunches and all that. But the pandemic has definitely made it different.
But I mean, it also is providing like a really good opportunity to learn, how the writers room operates. And then when you're invited to kind of work your way up, and the same thing when you're on staff, right? You're eventually learning how to be a showrunner. But in addition to that, of course, you're working on your own projects as well, right? Last time we were talking, you have a couple pilots that you're working on. And what is, when you are kind of crafting those things, what's sort of the strategy there with potentially like discussing that with the showrunner, or how are you kind of approaching that when you are working on your own stuff and you have all this access, but at the same time, you're like kind of knowing when is the right opportunity to talk about those things?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I started for Marvel, they actually read one of my pilots before they hired me. And that was part of the interview process, was knowing that I was a writer that they found to be at least somewhat confident to take me on, I suppose. And then there was kind of an understanding that I would give feedback to scripts every week. Every time they were submitted, we got new drafts. I would turn in my notes as well as a fellow writer in the room. And there's kind of a motivation to pitch yourself to your showrunner, but you typically are supposed to wait until your show is ending to do so. So you're not intervening when the show is, trying to be made in the process. It's really great to get feedback from other writers on your ideas and how to pitch them, your log line, tweaking all of it. I can't express how grateful I am to writers who have boosted me up. I actually was connected to this job because one of my writers on Moon Knight knew somebody at Stars and they networked for me.
That's great. So let's kind of continue in the chain. So let's say, JB, you've got this new pilot, you're looking for a new agent, and Roberto, he reaches out to you, friend of DePaul, coming over. So like when you're looking at potentially taking on a new client, what are you looking for?
I think in general for any representative, and especially when pursuing a client, a writer, or director, I think having a connection and a passion, a belief in the material, like to kind of read something and say, I believe that I will be more than happy to stand on rooftops and shout out, you need to read this, you need to watch this. So definitely having strong material is always going to be key. I think we're in a moment, we're in a movement that has been very delayed for a long time when it comes to looking for writers of color, diverse writers in general. And a lot of people want to pay attention to finding writers that fit certain buckets, but we should be always focusing on the talent and of what's on the page. And then from there, it's just like, I say there's three kind of things in the back of my mind. Talent on the page, what is the connective tissue in the case of JB? For example, like he's in the Marvel camp, he's at the John Wells camp with Shameless, and now he's known at Stars. And so it's like, wow, like he has some really good kind of, different layers to his connections. And then besides that, the third thing is personality. Can I connect with JB on a personal level? Like, can I feel confident in knowing that JB not only has that talent on the page, but when it comes to being an agent, we're only really doing, I'd say about 30 to 50% of the work in the sense of calling up people and saying, hey, read this. We only open the door. We open the door and we let JB into these meetings, and JB at the end of the day is in control of his own destiny. And he is going to win these executives over. He's going to win these producers over. And understanding that when I meet with him after I've read him and being like, I'm, basically in a sense, like, do I want to hang out with JB? Do I want people to hang out with JB as well? Especially when it comes to being in the TV writer's room. There are certain writers, like Gloria Colette, who says, I look at writers and I think to myself, do I want to be in a room with these people for 8 to 10 hours a day? And in a sense, I have to, approach it that way too, where it's like, you have the talent, you have the connections, and also at the same time, you have the personality, then that's what wins me over.
In addition to, I mean, that's really great, but is it just the pilot, let's say, that he's submitting? Are you wanting to see like, hey, there's more than just this one piece to send out? I know some of these other things, it's more like focused on the career in terms of connections, personality, these things where you can reliably put him in a room and know that he's going to do well and pitch the project well. But going back to the actual work, like how much do you want to see? Or are you just like one pilot that's good, we'll go? I know you're typically only sending one piece, but I mean, like in terms of the portfolio, are you wanting more than just that one?
Definitely would say having more than one is always good, because you want to be able to show different speeds, different skills to your writing. Obviously, if you're a comedy writer and you have a multi-cam and a single cam, that's going to be very beneficial to any rep, and to yourself more importantly, because you can go up for almost any comedy at this point. At the same time, though, I would say like having being confident in the material, whether if you have a drama and a comedy, like that's always good too, because at that point, like there's almost no job that we can't put you up for, aside from the fact that it may not tonally resonate with the material. Like if you have a light hour drama in the vein of This Is Us, I'm not gonna be able to put you up for a drama that's Dexter, because Dexter's really gritty, Dexter's really dark, and if we don't have that darkness in that material, then that rules. I don't want to say rules you out, but it definitely if it has to pass the quote unquote smell test of being read, then at that point I'd be like, hey, look, you really want to work on Dexter, the reboot? Like it's not gonna happen. And then I want to clarify in terms of connections too. It's not just about being in what rooms you're in, but also where you've worked, and also what life experience you bring to the table. Because you may not have ever been in a writer's room, but like you might have been a lawyer. Like, wow, like that's super interesting. Like, let me look at that. So just to add a different layer to it as well.
Great. So kind of continuing in this path here, then let's say that you decide to rep JB, and now you're going to bring the pilot potentially over to ABC for Sam to review. What's that conversation look like? Is it just picking up the phone? Like what kind of groundwork do you do before bringing it over to Sam?
It could be a number of things. Before COVID, sometimes, it could be me and Sam talking over lunch, like, hey, you know what? I have a writer you really need to read. His name is JB Ballard. He's great. He actually was on Moon Knight prior to be representing him. Read his hour-long drama. It's great. You're gonna love it. At the same time, though, it's that, but over the phone. And then I'll say, right now we're in a moment where we're in front of our computers a lot. I'm kind of guilty, and maybe it's a trick that Sam may or may not like, but I may not be able to get Sam on the phone because she's, probably reading stuff or on call. So I'll just email her or I'll Slack her. We're on Slack boards, and I'll be like, hey, Sam, like, are you reading any new writers? And it's like, yeah, what do you got? Like, hey, I'm gonna send you something over. And at that point, it's just about, again, connectivity there, where if me and Sam get along and have worked in the past, which we actually have for the past year and a half, then I can have that confidence to be like, hey, like, at this point, it's just my taste. And if she's like writers of mine in the past that I've shared with her, then, there's a hope that she'll strike to this one too.
Cool. All right, Sam. So now they're coming over to you to try to get something set up. What's that process look like on your end?
So it's a little tricky. Also, Roberto calling me out on not responding. It's hard in COVID. Office lines. I still haven't gotten into my voicemail, but it really depends. Like Roberto's right. Like if there are agents or managers that I have relationships with, I will usually always read their writers, or take meetings, or take the meeting even before I read because I trust them so much. But in terms of development, it's a little tricky because if Roberto calls me and says, hey, I got this writer, he came up with, if it's a pitch, then I have to go through the process of clearing, which I can explain it. But if it's a spec, if it's something he's already written, and it sounds like something that could be an ABC show, even though there's times like, it's a space opera, maybe not, generally it could be on ABC, but I might say, hey, send it my way. I'd rather read it than say no. And it's the next best thing. So that's that process if it's already written. But if it's a pitch, and then in terms of the process of clearing it, he would have producers attached to it. And I would ask, if there's a studio attached. I can hear pitches without studios attached because now we're a part of, the Walt Disney Company is so large. And being at a network, what's cool is that I have the ability to package things. So I could, if we heard JB's pitch and he just had a producer on it or he didn't, and I liked it, I could think of what producer, what studio would I want to attach onto it. But that process is a lot harder because, say, for instance, you don't have the producer and you don't have the studio with the pitch. One, it doesn't usually look as packaged, right? And attractive, but sometimes they're half-baked. So that's the other, it's like, there's always it's like a three-pronged approach when Roberto calls me and just trying to figure out at what point would JB be ready, to come in and pitch.
And when are you hearing pitches after like a pilot is submitted to kind of flesh out the series, or are you ever hearing pitches first without the pilot being written?
Yeah, we probably hear about, well, we're year-round development now. But we probably hear 250, 300 pitches a year. I would say of all of those that have nothing written or nothing that they're giving me, is probably 228 of them. Most of them, I never see material before it. They're just, they might have written, obviously they've written their pitch pages, but like they might have written it on spec, didn't get really any bites, then they've retooled it, they've gotten their pitch pages, and they're ready for the development process once we buy it. So usually nothing's written like in terms of a script. It's just the pitch pages.
Now, if there is a script submitted, and this would go to Roberto as well, how are you relying on coverage at all, or are you actually reading these scripts?
I think it depends on the writer, to be honest. Like if it's coming from a client, another manager, or a manager, I should say, or a lawyer, we do definitely give them the time of day in the sense of like, let's read it. Like I need to be able to connect to it. At the same time, though, just really depends too, where if there's a lot on our weekend read, if I had an assistant, which I don't have, unfortunately, it could be something like, hey, like, can you put eyes on it first, and then like read it this weekend, and then like flag it for me, and I'll read it Sunday night if by chance it's that good. In addition to, like, especially if we're working with established writers, more at that, they've staffed before, mid-level and up, we're definitely always reading because we want to kind of get to it. At the same time, though, like I mentioned, like, it's about connection, if we believe. But I will say, though, like, when it comes to like those screenwriting contests, whether it's a Nichols Fellowship or something off the blacklist, typically we will have individuals in the mailroom, other assistants read. I know with a different writing program, like, I'll get all the scripts and I'll share them, and we'll do like a nice little Google Doc, and I'll ask all the assistants to chime in, and then have them email me directly, and or the coordinator, and say, hey, you need to read this like ASAP. So that's how we also handle it as well.
Yeah, and same for us. Like, I'm probably reading, I mean, we also have a weekend read, and everybody's assigned different scripts. It depends on usually the auspice in terms of if it's something like, we really trust our assistants, so and our associates. So, if they read something over the weekend and they're saying you have to read it, we'll read it. And if they say you don't have to read it, we won't read it. But if it's it's a spec that's being sent all around town from an incredible writer, I absolutely will be reading it. Not to say I won't read things that aren't from huge auspices, but we get sent a lot.
Yeah. Everybody kind of mentioned pitching a bit. We can touch on that just a second. So any just quick advice on pitching? I don't want to, make this a pitching panel or anything like that, but it's been mentioned a few times here. So for Sam, like, when you are hearing pitches, is there anything that, I think you also mentioned too, like something that's right for ABC. And I do think that is a big part of pitching, is knowing like before you even go into a network, knowing like, are they even going to be remotely interested in this project? But can you kind of talk about that element, about like what is an ABC or a network show, or like what you specifically are sort of looking for?
Yeah, well, first I'll say, before you get in the room, if we've cleared it, we've already had our discussion. If we think it could be an ABC show, so that already is like good news for the writer. What makes an ABC show, I mean, every year we come out with like mandates on things we're looking for. Roberto has probably heard these, the juicy soaps, the character-driven procedurals. You just look at the past of ABC and just figure out like the Losts, the Grey's Anatomies, the Ugly Bettys, but also trying to look at, every year we try to look at what will our audience want. So like right now, a lot of our discussions is like, what is the audience going to want post-COVID? Like what do we all want as consumers? What do we want to watch? What do we want to escape to? Yeah, so that's kind of, I know it's kind of a non-answer, but yeah, it's, but we're a broadcast network. We are here to service America. So a lot of it these days is about trying to have authentic stories and having things that come from different cultures, but make them authentic. They can't come from somebody that just, likes that culture, like Hilaria Baldwin or something, so it has to be somebody, that's kind of what we're focused on now, having a sense of responsibility and a sense of service to our audience, and servicing them in that way. And I guess my advice on pitching, I've heard a billion of them, but I would say my favorite way, the template for a pitch, and I'm sure everybody's different, but my favorite template is starting off with, personal anecdote, like, why are you telling the story? Like, why are you telling the space opera? Because you've always wanted to go to space. And ever since you were a kid, you saw this, like something that makes me immediately grab me. Cause like a pitch is, you're just telling a story, right? So like you're trying to capture me from the beginning of it. So if you tell me something personal, something emotional, I'm immediately leaning in. And then from there, I usually like when a writer goes into their teaser, because that's also the most attention grabbing, right, of a script. And they go through their teaser, and then it's like basically they're announcing their title card, like, and it's space opera, an exploration into what, and then they're saying what it is and the log line, and then they maybe give a brief introduction of their characters, and then going into the rest of the pilot story, not like super beat by beat by beat, but like, okay, what's happening in the A story, the B story, the runner, and then maybe very briefly talking about the rest of the season and the rest of the series. And I think sometimes there's an assumption that you have to pitch out an entire series because I'm buying an entire series, but like the pilot should sell it. The pilot should sell the show. It's a proof of concept for the entire show. So that's why it's so important. And that, you know, this is the development process. There are so many projects that we buy. So the pitch doesn't have to say, okay, and this is what happens in season 5, because in all likelihood, we won't even make it there in the development. The development process for us is usually the pilot episode. You might order a few more episodes, but yeah, so that's usually why I like to have it so brief, because the pilot and your characters and what you're trying to say with the show should sell it enough. That's kind of what the template I like, and then leaving the end for questions, obviously.
For sure. Roberto, when you're working with a client before they're going in addition to obviously you're like thinking like, what's the best place to kind of set this project up? Is there any sort of coaching that you do with your clients before they go in? Like, hey, be aware of this, or are you having them run through the pitch in front of you and then giving some feedback on what they could do better, things to add, things like that? Or you just kind of like go in and do your thing?
Never go in and do your thing. That's never that's never a plan of attack, I would say, just because obviously there's those moments where they may be meeting generally with an executive, a producer, like Sam, and they may ask you like, well, what are you working on? And sometimes it's what's called a back pocket idea. I think you taught us that, Matt. Like, always have some ideas in your back pocket. And you might just be like, look, I have this space opera I'm working on. And then at that point, Sam's like, well, tell me more. And then at that point, like, you might just literally just kind of pitch it like randomly, like what you really truly do believe, which actually might work out in your benefit, but it can also work in not in your favor. But more so what we tell our clients, at least from my experience with a few pitches that I've helped with, and more so when I've been as an assistant on the desk, is like, let's hear it. Like, let's see the pitch pages. Like, for example, there's a client that I set up, pitching on Monday on something, and they sent me something late last night. It was like, hey, here's my 12-page treatment and my pitch. Like, give me some thoughts, give me some ideas. And honestly, everything that Sam just said is in that document. It's like, why me? Why am I this right person? Why are you the one telling it? And then also, what's the connection to it? So honestly, like what Sam said was like to a T what we would ideally want to hear from our clients, especially as in a pre-pitch, and we practice it, especially when it's for these big jobs. I think more so on the feature side, I see a lot of it more where you're going up for these like OWAs, especially at Disney. Like, that's not something something you just sneeze at. It's like you might want to practice like 2 or 3 times and then go in there so you can wow, especially if you get in front of Kevin. Like, that itself is a testament to your ability to pitch, but also it's like you have to seal the deal at that point.
Yeah. And then JB, for the writer, you're the one, going in and pitching these ideas, getting all this feedback. What do you feel like is the most challenging part of it, or that in your experience that you've either struggled with, or just different tips, kind of like from the writer's point of view? What's your take on pitching?
I think that both Roberto and Sam have nailed it. It's the hardest thing for me is pitching yourself. Like, you're also pitching your whole mantra as a writer when you go up for a project. So a lot of it is working in your personal story, like Sam said, and kind of trying to incorporate that into what you're writing and what you're trying to write. For me, whenever I pitch, it's always looking at what's been done before and referencing from previous things and how my pitch is different. Trying to focus on the uniquity of it is important for me. I've really valued seeing how other people pitch. You can find a bunch of free or online, you can find pitch documents for big shows, like Adventure Time's pitches on the internet, and I've read that several times to kind of see how they developed that from the beginning, from the outset. I think it's great to know where you see the characters going, but Sam is so right with, you don't know what season 5 is going to look like. You don't know if you're going to get a season 5. So for my show, for Gaslit, my showrunner pitched the first 3 episodes. He knew what the first 3 episodes were going to be, and that was enough to get stars in the door. And then we wrote the rest of it. So that's kind of the process from my experience.
Great. Cool. Yeah, I want to move off of that topic and move over to kind of the current state of the industry and potential challenges that you see for the industry overall, and especially as that relates to people who are trying to break in. Why don't we, I would like to start with just that, like what is the state of the industry? I mean, we can look at Variety and Deadline and see it's not ideal, but I mean, like what are besides the obvious of theaters being closed down and stuff, there's also like a lot of interesting, I don't know if it's all positive news on the streaming front. Sam, since you're kind of dealing with this on a daily, everybody is, but especially as an exec, what's sort of the challenges that you foresee or that you guys are experiencing right now?
Well, for us, I mean, the challenges previously were how do we get back into production? We have the usual traditional pilot season, even though we do year round now. And, on March 11th, I was in New York at 2 table reads. And then I obviously had to leave. And then all of those things that were supposed to be shot on Monday weren't going to be shot anymore. So we've been able to get back into production, but everybody's kind of on pins and needles of like, how can we keep this going? Obviously with COVID, so everything is dependent on production, right? So like even, features you're seeing, like it's dependent on production, but like where are you going to distribute it? Now you're seeing all of this like HBO Max stuff and everything. So I think it's exciting in the feature world in the sense that like, I think $20 million movies are coming back, like rom-coms, I hope have a resurgence because it was trending in a direction that was like straight up tentpoles. But then I think it's going to be hard I think it's a double-edged sword. I think for everybody trying to come out of school right now, I don't think you need to immediately move to LA anytime soon. You just take your address off your resume and try to get a job because you don't need to do it like there, So I think that's a good thing. It gives you time to save more money. It gives you time to, who knows what this will look like in a year, but I think the opportunities are going to be fewer. So that's what I think is going to be challenging for anybody coming out of school.
What do you mean by that? Are the opportunities just not as many projects set up, or that?
Yeah, and I'm sure like, and I've heard this with a lot of writers trying to break in, and I know with our program writers, like we have a writers program, and we try to set them up in staff writing roles. But the problem is because there's fewer productions, or because there's people like us who want to put together a mini room first and get some scripts, there's less of that lower level writing job, and there's less writer assistant gigs. Like I'm happy JB you're on a thing, but there's a lot less. So that's why I think and these big corporations are consolidating. So then there's even so it's all just being, there's a bottleneck at the lower level, I think.
Yeah, it's so true.
Okay, sorry. I was going to ask Roberto, what do you there's probably a lot of challenges with repping clients, and that, people may be like, this is interesting, but maybe come back in 6 months. Are you getting that kind of feedback, or are people buying things right now?
I think it's a mix of everything. And also what Sam said, I think there's like multiple layers, because you have the writers that are staffers, the ones that are trying to break in, join rooms. To echo what Sam said, it's tough for those lower level writers to kind of get into some of these writing gigs, because there's fewer rooms, and then the rooms that do exist, they end up being mini rooms. I have a saying that I think at this point people are going to just steal or just borrow. You have to treat, especially when it comes to the streamers, you have to treat writers' rooms when announced by streamers like a Drake mixtape. If you're reading the headline, it's too late. And I'll get asked by clients that either I'm on the team for or point for, and they're like, hey, like the Sex and the City reboot got announced, right? And at that point, I knew about it, about 3 weeks beforehand, but we were doing, the good work on the kind of outside, trying to get writers in there. But by the time they announced, it's like, they probably have their 5 or 6 writers already. And that's exactly what happened. Like they just ended up going with, writers from the original iteration. But in terms of, when it comes to development, people are definitely, stacking up on development. I think though, there were a lot of what we call if-come deals. Like if it gets set up, the money will come. And obviously those are not great, but obviously, you know, if you have 2 or 3 of those kind of in the works and they get to a Sam Campos at ABC and they say, yes, we'll buy it, then, you know, that's great, it's set up. I think development has been affected by maybe a 10 to 20% clip, where if by chance Sam heard maybe, you know, or at ABC, for example, like 3 years ago, they were maybe buying over 100 different projects. And by buying, I mean like they ordered scripts for the pilot, with a handful being given production commitments. That number probably went down to closer to 80, maybe 85, which is still not, you know, a great loss, but at the same time, like being very selective. And then when it comes, I think where the effect is more so felt is with directors. Directors, especially for these productions, especially on the current side, they're going to what's called block episode shooting, which means that a director is doing 2 to 4 episodes back to back to back. And so it's done for the simple fact of to ensure that people don't have to quarantine. They're not bringing in, you know, JB and then Sam to then quarantine. They'll just bring in JB to direct, and he'll stay there for, you know, 8 to 10 weeks and do 3 episodes, like literally back to back to back. And it's cost effective, but it also ensures, especially, that they trust JB. They trust the director that they hire to direct, you know, these episodes. So, you know, it's all over the place. There's less series orders. There's a few things that were ordered a year ago, and then they went away in April because of they were called COVID casualties. And you know, it's you know, hopefully it's on the uptick, where we're going to be going into April with, you know, the vaccine and everything rolling out, that people will, you know, the productions will go back up to where they were a year ago or prior to a year ago.
JB, just to get your take, what do you feel like, how are things going for writers? And I mean, you're currently working on the show. What's their sense though? Are like they're going to be moving in an active production, or that's still on hold and you're just focusing on writing right now?
Well, we are planning to shoot in April of this year, so we'll see how that goes. We're trying to stay in LA mostly and potentially shoot in DC as well. But I guess the biggest casualty has definitely been the writers, the lower level writers positions. The writer's PA job is all but extinct in COVID because there's no production that writers' rooms are coordinating with. So you don't have a writer's PA getting lunches or coffees, things of that nature. That whole job is kind of defunct. And a lot of the rooms are mini rooms, or you have a streamer that has like 6 episodes. So you're not getting a chance to write an episode or get a co-write credit as support staff as often. That's a big loss in the quarantine times. And I guess for writers' rooms, I know most writers I talk to don't want to be in person for another year. So we're going to have a lot more virtual rooms in the coming times. I have a friend who's a writer's assistant and he lives in Chicago. Half of my writer's room is non-LA, even though it's an LA show. So that's kind of the trend that I see going for the next year or two.
Cool. All right. Well, we're going to open it up to questions here. We've got one from Emily Malarski. She wants to know, for those who are graduating in the spring and don't have the opportunity to do the LA quarter at this time, what some strategies there? I know, Sam, you were just talking about some of those, but if anybody else has some tips, if you were in the situation or had a close family member that was about to come out, and, you know, given the state of the pandemic, what do you think is the best course of action for anybody who might be finishing up with their education and thinking about going to LA?
Well, in my opinion, I think that a great thing is to just really start your networking if you haven't already. I got a manager to reach out to me on LinkedIn just when I updated saying that I had worked on Moon Knight. That was the first time where someone had like taken the time to read me and consider representing me. And there's definitely the tendency to think that it's only in LA that you can get it done, but nowadays more than ever, you can definitely work with people. If you know DePaul students who are in LA, it's great to catch up with them, see what they're working on as well. That would be a method for me. I knew that graduating from DePaul, the classes before me, people like Sam, had already paved the way for DePaul students, which was great.
Yeah, I would say, thank you. But yeah, I would say that network, reach out to DePaul people, try to get, you know, especially since everything's virtual, and especially like office environments are virtual. So try to get internships, because that'll also be, you know, the internships are the best. Like so you don't even though there is no LA quarter, I think you could still get, you know, an internship in LA, but doing it virtual. And a lot of production companies have really great internship programs where they will put on, like, I was just on a panel at a production company, because every Thursday they have a panel with people. So like, you know, there's ways to be an intern in LA without being there. So I would say try to look at internships. Completely agree. Network. Just ask people. Don't lead with, can you get me a job? But lead with, it's hard in COVID, right? Like I usually would recommend, say to somebody, hey, can I buy you a cup of coffee and get your advice? But Zoom is so easy. If you said to somebody like, hey, you know, I'm thinking about moving to LA. I really admire the way you've done it. Would you mind hopping on a Zoom for a half hour just to like give me some advice? Every single person's going to say yes. If they don't, then you don't want to, then you don't need to hear their advice.
Yeah, really quick on related to that for internships. Do you have any tips on, because we do have a lot of students who are doing remote internships right now, how to make an impression in that situation? Because there's a lot of just, you know, coverage assignments and things like that. So it's easy to sort of get lost in the mix, but do you have any tips on how you can sort of stand out in a remote internship situation?
I guess I would say take advantage of the people that work there. You know, in any internship, you should, and I wish I had done this in my internship, you should reach out and ask for some time with every person that works there. Maybe not the president, but like the assistants, absolutely. Get to know them because they're going to be moving up one day. So you should get to know them. And just, this all kind of goes back to just be like a human about it. Like just connect with people. Everybody's a person. And LA's interesting because everybody has a dream, right? Like everybody is there because there was something about TV and movies that led them to this path. So it's so personal to begin with. So if you could just like ask for some, you know, time with somebody and just talk about that, talk about stories, talk about where you're from, you know, that guilty pleasure you watched this weekend, Bling Empire, you know? So like you'll connect with people if you can just get in a room with somebody, Zoom room. So I would say that, and just be hungry and humble. Like ask for more work. Don't be too thirsty about it, but don't expect any type of, you know, I think don't expect that they're going to give you a job you know, if you know, did one coverage assignment for them.
Definitely agree with Sam. I think being hungry and humble is probably the best course to take. You know, definitely, but also recognize, don't say yes to just everything, because then you end up having to do 10 coverage assignments and they expect them all done within a week or two. And then, you know, that would not be fun, especially if they happen to involve books. But definitely, you know, having connections with the different individuals that are there, like whether it's the assistants, the CEs, like Sam said, if you could get FaceTime with the president, great. But one thing to kind of always keep in mind is, you know, something that was taught to instilled in my mind, and I think in a lot of our minds at DePaul was treat everyone in your cohort, treat everyone that you work with at some point with respect as you would want to be treated, because the people that you work with today may be your colleagues of tomorrow. They may, you know, I may have been an assistant with Sam, you know, at an agency 4 years ago, and I look at her now, so it's like she's literally going to be the person that I have to, you know, kind of say, hey, would you like my client script? And I think, you know, understanding where, you know, having just friendships at the end of the day, like having some kind of friendship with the people that you work with or you intern with would be very key. And also, like Sam said, like reaching out to people that you may have some kind of you know, you would love to get their advice. You know, it's busy, but a lot of people are making time for calls. Like I probably have done, I do like a call or two a week. Actually, I've done a few with a few of the DePaul alum in the past, you know, month or so. So like I'll just give them, you know, 30 minutes of my time is not a lot to give or to ask.
Cool. Another question came up here from Brad was about how do you keep all these stories straight when you are like reading a ton of material and being able to kind of focus in the story in hand, especially if you're doing a weekend read where you might be reading upwards of 10 different drafts. Are you just kind of like singling out the ones that speak to you, or is there some other sort of technique in order to sort of clear the decks and be able to focus on the project in hand?
Well, I don't
me,
read as much as you guys have to, I'm assuming. But for network drafts versus studio drafts, it's a lot of Google Drive work for me. And it's a lot of just like taking notes. I have several notepads that are full of notes whenever a writer turns in a draft and wants feedback. Because usually there's like a 24-hour, 48-hour window before you turn it around. So it's just trying to keep track of all of it.
for me, I would say it's multiple things. I probably need to choose one. I have a notebook where I literally, write, I jot down, comps, in quick initial thoughts. The best course that I follow for myself is I have a Google spreadsheet, which, I try and update as much as I can. And at least I'll email myself my own thoughts. I think, typically speaking though, for material that I respond to that's for a rep, I will email someone, either my colleague or whoever sent it to me and say, hey, like, what's the scoop? I need to sign this person. So, that's kind of what I do. And I put my thoughts out in that email as well.
Yeah, and I would say I remember what I love. Like in the past 3 months, like I've read so much, but the things I really loved, like I can tell you exactly what happens in them. And then in terms of like what's nice, we do buy a ton of projects, which Roberto said. But I'm assigned, I have my own projects. So luckily I don't have to be on all of those. And I don't have to read all of those. So for my own, in terms of how I keep track, really love the star drafts. So I could see the changes so clearly. And luckily technology is so incredible now. So I have an app called Good Notes and I keep all of my projects with all different drafts there. So I can see so clearly every note I've given and notes we've given to the writers. So there's great ways, but yeah, if it's a bad script, I wouldn't be able to tell you what it was about.
Cool. Again, another question here from Ronan Morrissey, who was asking about some potential avenues if you are a writer to kind of parlay that experience into directing. Any tips on that at all, or how to make that transition?
It's definitely going to come down to having material on tape. If you have shorts, whether it's your own, then that might be the best course of avenue. Directing is not an easy thing to break into when it comes to episodic, at least. Obviously, like if you have, worked, there are a lot of writers that transition into directing now, where you look at like a K.O. Yugen, who's on This Is Us, who's directing episodes now, and they're in their 4th season. But like she's been in that room for 4 years. I think it just comes down to familiarity with the content, with the material, and obviously also directing her own script may not be a bad thing either. But then if you want to do film, it's just going to come down to having the kind of vision, the ability to kind of say, hey, I can tell this story better than James Wan or whoever else. But obviously, if you're positioning yourself to be the writer and the director, it's just it might be a matter of like, obviously if it's a big studio film, I don't think it might succeed, in my personal opinion. Then again, I'm on the TV side, but definitely if you do an independent film that draws rave reviews, like if you do like a Chloe Zhao type film, where look at her now, like she's directing like some of the biggest films over the next few years.
Cool. Right. I got another question here from Mackenzie Costanzo, who wants to know what's a realistic timeline in terms of finding good work. And I think that's just in reference to sort of the pressure. She's saying here that they're graduating class feeling pressure to find something quickly, which doesn't seem plausible at the moment, given the prior need for experience and also with COVID going on.
Ooh, the catch-22 of you need experience for the job, but you can't get the job without experience. I love it. Love that part of the industry. For me, it was I came out to LA through the LA Quarter, and I had 2 internships for 6 or 7 months before I got my first paid assistant gig. And it's just kind of a grind. It's a lot of putting in your time and trying to make sure people know you want to do the same job you're doing, but for money. So conveying that from the jump is important. Timetable wise, like, yeah, the first year or so is hard, especially if you're trying to get into the writing path and you know that you have to work as an assistant, trying to do the assistant pipeline to get in. That's my recommendation, is just actively working as hard as you can for it.
Yeah. Anybody else want to comment on that at all, or we can move on? I did have one more kind of thing that you've all sort of mentioned, and kind of what the current state of the industry is, but what would you like to see change about the industry? I know, Roberto, you were talking about some of the challenges with diversity and inclusion in the industry, but if you could either play a role in that or any other elements here that you would like to see change in the way that currently that the industry operates.
Well, for me, you know, just my personal take is obviously having more opportunities afforded to individuals that especially don't come from traditional backgrounds, you know, especially, you know, the one thing that everyone always says or fights against is, you know, nepotism, like, oh, hey, here's my nephew, hire them. I think having, affording those abilities or those opportunities to individuals who really just want it, they want to be a part of this industry. They come from not just, you know, LA and the surrounding areas, but more so they come from, you know, I'm from the back of the yards in Chicago. Like that's something that built me, you know, salt of the earth in the sense. And for me, those experiences shaped who I am and what I've become. And I would love to see more people coming from either that neighborhood or Pilsen or other surrounding areas to come out here and give it a shot. At the same time, though, I think just being able to, you know, give individuals from non-traditional schools, you know, everyone thinks of hiring folks from certain institutions, and obviously, like, you know, DePaul is especially with the MFA program. It was when I joined it, it was I think in its 4th or 5th year, and you know, at this point, it's going into year 9, year 10, and it's making headways. And it's like, wow, like there are some really good students coming out of there that we should be hiring for different roles. So I think also, like, you know, it expands beyond that, expands beyond just hiring from local institutions or local universities. And then lastly, I think more so on the, you know, not just the writer side, but on the executive and agency side, you know, to provide more opportunities, because I think, and there's some great things that are happening, especially at ABC and Disney, where they are really, you know, championing having more diverse executives, especially having a pipeline type program. And, you know, on the agency side, the biggest obstacle always was the lack of pay. You know, I'm proud to be at a place that was the first to sign the DOGA Code of Conduct, and then also raised wages for assistants, where prior to, you know, 2019, or people were, prior to 2020, I should say, people were making on average between 35 to, you know, maybe $40,000 a year. And, you know, people, you know, the wages were raised, you know, at least to being a more affordable rate, where, you know, people are closer to that 50K mark. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but I'll definitely say this much, it definitely goes a long way.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the biggest thing, one of the biggest things I'd love to see change is higher pay at the lower level. And because what's happening, or what has happened in the industry for so long, is that because that lower level was so low, the only kids that can afford it were their parents are paying their rent, their car, everything. So then you're getting a pipeline of people from the same schools, from the same, you know, privileged backgrounds, which is then shutting out all, and then you had unpaid internships too. So then you had people that came from working class backgrounds that just couldn't make it, had no means to do it. So that's what I think. It's nice that now, you know, most internships are paid, and that lower level, the assistants, the support staff, I would hope are going to continue to make more money. And then in terms of diversity and inclusion, that's something that's huge. You know, Roberto mentioned ABC. We came out with these things called the inclusion standards. So a show cannot be on ABC or picked up for pilot if you do not meet our standards, because I think it's just wrong. You can't have a show on, you know, from somebody from not said background that's writing about a show, that also 50% of the characters aren't diverse, the director's not diverse, the producer, you know, it just can't happen anymore. So that I'd say is that I would like the industry to change, and you know, I'm a part of like 50 task forces, so I hope it is changing. Even in our own development, we went from around 25% development from people of color, and now I think when we ran our numbers, it was around like 67%, because we made it a goal for ourselves that if Gen Pop is 40% diverse, we want to meet it and exceed it. So yeah, so I just hope that this trend just continues.
Yeah, for me, I think a big thing is environmental awareness in the industry. I just remember as a writer's assistant or as a writer's PA, printing out dozens of scripts every day and pages and sides for productions, and realizing that people can do a lot of this virtually, just using their iPads or their laptops or their phones to read along. And I just wish that companies would move in that direction. I think we're starting to see a shift, but it's slow and steady. And as far as diversity is considered, I've been really blessed with my writers' rooms as of late. The room I'm in now has more women than men, which is a new thing for me in this industry, as well as seeing more people of color represented. There's definitely an encouragement to take like the showrunner courses, and there's more and more diverse voices in those classes. So that's important as well.
All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody. We were out of time. Thanks to Roberto, Sam, and JB. It's great seeing you again. And thanks so much for speaking to our Courier 12 today. Next event is Chris Cantwell and Kat O'Brien. We'll be talking about show running. So hopefully everybody can check that out. But again, thank you all for coming today. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.